12th meeting of the Planning and Zoning Commission to order. Second item on our agenda is hearing of residents. We didn't have anybody signed up, so we'll move on to the next item. Next item is our consent agenda. Item 3A, minutes for the May 8th, 2019 regular meeting. 3B, PC 2019-016, consider and act upon a request for approval of a final plat of Mark Roberts Subdivision 4, an approximately 3-acre tract of land generally located 1,500 feet south of the intersection between IH-35 and FM 1103, more specifically described as 5702 FM 1103, City of Schertz, Guadalupe County, Texas. Commissioners, any items for individual consideration? All right, a motion for approval?
So moved.
Right.
Second.
Motion to approve by Mr. Greenwald, second by Mr. Outlaw. Any other comments, questions? All right, call for a vote.
Aye.
Aye. Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right, 6 ayes, no nays, motion carries. Next item on the agenda, public hearing. 1 second here. All right, this will be for SUP 2019-002. Hold a public hearing, consider and make a recommendation on a request for a specific use permit to allow an automotive repair major. Land use on approximately 1.5 acres of land generally located 1,500 feet south of the intersection between IH-35 and FM 1103, more specifically described as 5702 FM 1103, City of Schertz, Guadalupe County, Texas. Nick, you're up. Yes. All right. So look at the time here. We'll open the public hearing at 6:05. If anyone wishes to come and speak on this issue, please state your name and address for the record.
I need to redo that. Mark Roberts, 4300 Spanish Oak. I'm the applicant for the special use permit. And basically what we're doing, the reason we're having to request a special use permit is because of the way the definition's written in the Unified Development or the Uniform Development Code, which doesn't allow for you to do any type of air conditioning repair or any type of transmission service or repair. We're doing the same thing that we're doing at our 3009 facility. And so that's the reason for the special use permit request. So that's it.
All right. Does anybody else wish to comment on this?
Staff is going to go ahead and give their presentation before the end of the public hearing. It was supposed to go after presentation. You're correct.
I didn't see you guys were ready on that, so.
No, yeah, but the computer is still loading. Thank you, though.
All right. Anybody else? Last call? All right, we'll go ahead and leave the public hearing open for after the presentation if anybody else does want to change their mind and speak. So, go ahead.
Perfect. All right, so as Commissioner Dawes said, this is a specific use permit to allow an automotive repair major land use at 5702 FM 1103. All right, so just for your reference, this here is the property outlined in green. The specific use permit is referencing this portion of the property here. This is FM 1103. Up here is IA-35. This is Northcliff, right in that area. In preparation for this hearing, 24 public hearing notices were mailed to the surrounding property owners. At the time of this presentation, staff has received 5 responses to the public hearing notices, 1 in favor of the SUP and 4 opposed to it. So this is the current zoning map of the area. Location of the subject property is indicated with a gold star. As you can see, the property is owned general business, as are the properties surrounding it. The property is currently adjacent to the FM 1103 right-of-way on the east. To the north is a general business zoned property that is currently used as an RV park. It's the Rancho Vista RV Park. To the west is a general business zoned property currently utilized as a retail commercial business. It's the Alamo Hangar business. And to the south, it's currently a non-conforming vacant single-family residence. And it also is zoned general business. So looking at the effect of this specific use permit on the existing and future adjacent development, the Schertz Comprehensive Plan identifies this area as single-family residential. However, This area of the comprehensive plan hasn't been updated since the original copy of the comprehensive plan in 2002. So the area that you see along I-35, that was updated with the Schertz, or the sector plan in 2013, pretty much just entailed in this area the properties that are directly adjacent or take access onto I-35. So this area down here remain unchanged and remains single-family residential. So the, oh, excuse me. I don't know how all I went to the very end of the presentation. Good for us. So this so for your reference, this area down here that was not colored in is the city of Cibolo. And so you guys can see kind of what the comprehensive plan is saying for that area as well. I've included it for your reference. Along FM 1103, as you go south on the roadway, it's designated as commercial. And the commercial land use category in Cibolo is intended for the development of businesses that rely on higher traffic volumes. So you can see that's what's referenced below on FM 1103 to the south of the property. So the subject property, so even though the proposed auto repair major land use does not conform with the single-family residential designation, it is still in conformance with the existing conditions of the FM 1103 area due to the commercial zoning designation of the adjacent properties, which I talked about earlier on the zoning map, but also because of the subject property's access to a principal arterial roadway, FM 1103. So this is our master thoroughfare plan, last updated in 2017. You can see from the key here that in red it's designated as a principal arterial roadway, planned for a 130-foot right-of-way. Principal arterial roadways provide the predominant passageways throughout the urbanized portions of our community and connect all of these areas to the regional freeway network. As you can kind of see here, it takes these regional areas up and across I-35. The primary function of the principal arterial is throughput rather than individual access, which is important to remember for this specific case, and they are built to accommodate higher volumes and levels of mobility. The subject property's proximity to a principal arterial is a really important piece to consider when looking at this proposed SUP. Principal arterials are not designed to provide individual access to single-family residences, and the property's direct access to 1103 indicates that the development of the property as a commercial business would be appropriate. The designation of 1103 as a highly trafficked roadway is also continued on 1103 as the road moves south through Cibolo. The Cibolo Master Thoroughfare Plan designates the road as a major arterial, which is essentially their version of our principal arterial, with the primary functions of serving a high volume of long-distance travelers and connecting these people to the activity centers. It's actually planned for a 150-foot right-of-way, 30-foot wider than in Schertz. So the major arterial roadway classification is not isolated to Schertz. It's not a specific section of the roadway that we've just chosen to make it such a highly trafficked road. It's shared throughout the surrounding areas and will be consistent along the roadway as it continues south. So this won't be an isolated incident of high traffic prone to commercial areas. So moving on to the conceptual site plan, you can see here that they're proposing approximately 8,000 square foot automobile repair commercial business. The site plan shows one proposed access point here onto FM 1103. It is a shared access point that exists inside a variable width ingress-egress easement so that this property, for the specific use permit, the subject property, can share the existing driveway with the property back here, which is the Alamo Hangar business that is currently existing. They're proposing to add 43 parking spots as required by UDC Article 10. And a 24-foot fire line you can see here extended on the north and east parts of the building. A final stormwater management plan was approved by our engineering department, but the applicant is still awaiting TxDOT's approval of the drainage plans. TxDOT's approval of the stormwater management plan will be added as a condition for approval of this SUP as a result. Regarding the screening requirements along this property, the masonry wall requirement for commercial properties adjacent to residential properties is not applicable along the southern border of this property. As you may see, it indicated as a vacant single-family residence on both the site plan and the plat. It's not applicable because the adjacent property is no longer a single-family residence, so the property down here. The adjacent property is zoned general business, which resulted in the single-family residence becoming a legal non-conforming use when there was someone living in it. However, the residence has been vacant for longer than 6 months. or 180 days. And according to our UDC Article 7, a non-conforming use or structure shall be deemed abandoned if the structure remains vacant for a continuous period of more than 180 days. So the adjacent property no longer has the ability to remain a single-family residence if someone moves back in, and therefore the screening requirement for commercial properties adjacent to the residential properties does not apply to this specific property. Here are the proposed elevations for the building. UDC section 2195 requires that all non-residential buildings comply with the exterior building materials, glazing requirements, and architectural feature requirements. And as you can see, the proposed building will be constructed with a combination of stucco, tile, and stone, consisting of at least 80% of each facade. The building will include at least 30% glass doors and windows on the street-facing side, which is this eastern elevation here. And the building also complies with all the minimum required horizontal and vertical articulations. For the landscaping, the applicant is proposing 39% of the total land area to be landscaped and to plant a total of 18 new trees, satisfying their base landscape installation requirement. The applicant will be preserving 40% of the protected trees on site, 2 out of the 5 trees up on the northern side of the site. They're proposing to plant 7 trees along FM 309 to satisfy the landscaping requirements along principal arterials, and they're complying with all their landscaping requirements. So overall, the site plan meets all the requirements outlined in the Schertz Unified Development Code, and therefore staff is recommending approval for the main 2 reasons. The subject property's proximity to the principal arterial roadway, that it's taking access off such a highly trafficked road, and the subject property's compatibility with the adjacent property's commercial zoning classifications. They're all zoned general business in the immediately surrounding areas, and the property is also adjacent to that roadway. We are recommending approval of the SUP to allow an automotive repair major land use conditioned upon the following. A building permit is approved within 1 year of the adoption of the SUP. The use begins operation within 2 years of the issuance of the permit, and that the Texas Department of Transportation approves the stormwater management plan. The applicant is here to answer any questions you have. Thank you.
All right, we still have the public hearing open, so is there anyone out in the audience that wishes to come and speak on this? All right, then, we will close the public hearing at 6:15. Commissioners, comments, questions?
Mr. Chairman. Some questions. To make sure I understand it correctly, the SUP will apply only to Lot 1.
Yes.
Okay. It's not really a site plan, but the layout that you've provided shows a nice flared driveway going out to what? The existing pavement, so that when they,
Here?
or is that the edge of the right-of-way?
Talk about right here?
Well, here's my concern, because we've seen it up at Willen Oaks. You've got a nice flared driveway like that, and as soon as they cut the roadway back to widen it, now you've lost that flare. Okay. At what point do we look at ingress and egress, maybe in terms of a decel lane off of 1103? Where would that come into the planning process?
I know that this driveway is existing, and so the flare will remain up into the existing portion of the road like you're talking about. As for a decel lane, I guess if they were required to do a traffic impact analysis, which they were not because of the vehicle trip hours, that kind of improvement would be triggered through a TIA, but they're not having enough vehicle trip hours to indicate that.
The point I was trying to make, Nick, about the flared driveway is if that driveway is designed to meet the current pavement, at the end of that driveway, if that's today's pavement, as soon as TxDOT comes along and takes the 20 or 30 feet to widen on that side, all that flare disappears. It's no longer a flared driveway. It's a skinny little,
They've already widened it.
So TxDOT will rebuild it to spec as they build the road. That's always part of that. I guess I don't know what example you're referencing where they've removed an apron and an approach and then not placed it back. Unless they are working on eliminating the driveway altogether, in which case they typically, when they phase those out,
Okay.
will continue to allow access, but they don't rebuild it all the way to the property line.
so basically what you're looking at is to simplify my thinking, TxDOT will take that flare and move it back.
Yep.
Okay. And then the other question is, do we know what kind of activities the current business back there that actually backs up? You know, we see citizen concerns about noise. If I do the math right, Lot 1 is 176 feet from the fence line, okay? But I'm curious if we know what kind of activity is currently going on Lot 2.
The retail business to the west,
Yes, do we know what they actually do?
so Alamo Hanger,
Yeah.
they make hangers, like clothes hangers.
Like coat hangers and things?
What's that?
Okay.
Like the little metal hangers. Oh, they don't make them
They
there.
don't make them there,
sell
they bring them in. He sells hangers
Mm-hmm.
and yada paper.
Okay.
Is what he sells out of there. And then as far as, so he doesn't have a lot of activity up there. And then as far as us, I mean, that shop's gonna be air conditioned, so the doors are closed. And really, the only thing we have that I guess someone would consider noisy would be an air compressor. But I can tell you today, we use air to fill a tire. We don't actually use air tools anymore hardly.
Mm-hmm.
Most of the stuff is battery operated tools. So I can look at, like I looked at our compressor, our hour meter on it the other day. So year to date, that compressor has run a total of 42 hours year to date. So, and we're open 5 days.
Mm-hmm.
We're not doing the 6 days or 7 days. We're basically, our operations run, really, we open at 7, we don't start work till 7:30, and we're done at 5:30. And the shop's gonna be air conditioned, as where the shop is, so anything that's, any type of what anybody might consider major work is inside. The only thing they do outside under those awnings is, a lot of times in the morning, they'll bring a car up and they'll hook a computer up to it or something and just basically do triage out there in the morning.
Mhm.
So, and then all those cars are really brought in to do repairs in the afternoon.
Okay. Well, I'm glad you mentioned your air conditioning. Somebody told me about how they went to your place the other day and all the doors were closed and they weren't sure you were open, so.
Yeah, the technicians love it.
Yeah, thanks.
I'll bet they do.
That's all I had for now, Mr. Chairman.
Can you show us on this site plan exactly where the right-of-way expansion is going to take off? How much of it?
So sorry, say your question again?
Where the future expansion, where the right-of-way that's going to be taken by TxDOT is going to go? How far back is it going to go?
TxDOT had acquired all their FM 1103 right-of-way to date, I believe, and it's to this point here.
Okay, so it already has been done then?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Any other comments or questions? Mr. Burrow? All right, Chair will entertain a motion.
Mr. Chairman, make a motion, we approve SUP 2019-002 with the following conditions. Building permit is approved within 1 year of adoption of the SUP ordinance. Use begins operation within 2 years of issuance of the necessary building permits. And Texas Department of Transportation approves the stormwater management plan.
All right, have a motion for approval. Do I have a second?
Second.
All right, second by Commissioner Bro. Any other comments, questions? All right, call for a vote.
Aye.
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 Aye. Motion carries 6-0. And we'll move on to the next item there. Good luck with your project, Mr. Roberts. All right, items for individual consideration. 5A, PC 2018-043, consider and act upon a request for approval of a preliminary plat of the Parkland subdivision, Unit 2A, an approximately 35-acre tract of land generally located approximately 1,500 feet east of the southeast corner of Eckert Road and Frobese Road intersection, City of Schertz, Guadalupe County, Texas. Emily.
Good evening, Commissioners. So as you had mentioned, I just want to get your bearings. This is Eckert Road, this is Frobese, and then this is Parklands Way. So you can see here, this is the platted, recorded Parklands Unit 1 that they are currently constructing homes in. And then Parklands Unit 2A is outlined here in green. So they are proposing to preliminary plat approximately 35 acres into 136 single-family residential lots, 109 lots that are 6,000 square feet, and 27 lots that are 7,200 square feet. This plat was reviewed in accordance with the original Parklands PDD ordinance. In addition to the single-family residential lots, Parklands Unit 2A does plat several open space, drainage, access easements, and the one lift station lot that you can see here. So I wanted to show you kind of how it fits into the Parklands overall MDP. So once again, this is Unit 1, this is Parklands Way, and then Unit 2A is outlined in the red. So in terms of access, this portion of Unit 2A does have two access points into Unit 1 through Village Park and Park Leaf. The other side of Parklands Way has access into Unit 1 through Park Glen, and then will have access through Park Bluff to Parklands Way that they will be extending. And then the lift station lot does have access through a 60-foot access easement. The site is serviced by Schertz Water and Sewer, CCMA, NBU, GVC, AT&T, Charter, and CenterPoint Energy. The preliminary plat is consistent with all applicable codes and ordinances, and staff is making a recommendation of approval. And we do have a representative of the project here tonight, if there's any questions.
All right, Commissioners.
I'm just looking for assurance again. Well, it looks like, you know, I go way back to the original when we were wrangling over access and all that. So before they can start construction of homes, they have to put the streets have to be in. That's correct?
Yes, sir. So all public infrastructure improvements will have to be completed prior to the plats being recorded, and the plat has to be recorded before we'll issue any building permits.
Thank you.
You mentioned open space. Is that all of the shaded area here, or where is that?
Yes, ma'am. So most of this shaded is open space, and then if you look on the plat exhibits themselves, the lots are identified, and then there's a note at the top that specifically states what those lots are for. Typically, they're the 900 lots. Yes, sir.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion that we approve the preliminary plat of Parkland Subdivision Unit 2A.
All right, I have a motion for approval. Do I have a second?
Second.
All right, second by Mr. Greenwald. Any other comments or questions? All right, call for a vote.
Aye.
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 Aye. 6 ayes, no nays, motion carries. Next item on the agenda, workshop and discussion. 6A, workshop discussion and public hearing on boarding and lodging houses. Mr. Bryce?
Good evening, Commission. So this is a follow-up from our last P&Z meeting. At that meeting, we determined, and it was decided, and there was consensus, that short-term rentals and our midterm rental issues were separate and need to be treated separately, so we've listed them separately, and we'll go over them each independently. So I'm going to start off with boarding houses and lodging houses, which is a more appropriate term for our midterm rentals, as we have since discussed. And so to begin with, I want to recap just a little bit. Whoops, this is... Sorry, these are the wrong slides. This is the wrong PowerPoint. Well, we'll just sort it out as we go. So the first item that we had, and bear with me for just a moment, was what is a midterm rental, right? And so we're really defining those, and that slide's still accurate, as rentals that are greater than a month but less than 6 months. Typically, they're the ones that we've seen so far are not owner-occupied. It's businesses renting individual rooms out of a traditional single-family dwelling. Subsequently, I'm sorry, give me just a moment. Okay, sorry about that. And so, as a function of those, we also talked about a lot of the impacts and concerns that were there. Specifically, there was the amount of people, noise levels that come with that, extra cars and vehicles parked in the road, blocking driveways and sidewalks, trash and debris. People were also saying that it decreased property values, but that hasn't been substantiated yet. And so that was kind of just our general complaints from the public. And so as we talked through these things and we talked through short-term rentals and kind of boarding houses, the general consensus from Planning and Zoning Commission at the last meeting was that the boarding houses, that there was a desire to have some regulation over that. What that regulation was going to look like, staff was going to come back to you, which is why we're here tonight. So the first thing in looking at how to address this as far as regulations go, staff feels that it's not adequately addressed in our zoning code. And so the process for this will be to first create a land use and include a definition, assign which zoning districts that should be permitted by right, which ones should have an SUP and which ones should not be allowed. Additionally, we then want to create regulations which, any additional regulations such as parking or design standards or landscaping that's relevant to that specific use as opposed to, our standards that we have now, which kind of define it by bigger use such as residential use, multifamily use, commercial, retail, office, and then manufacturing. And so with that, I feel like the first one that, as we did a bunch of research into land use and definition, that came up was there are a variety of different definitions across multiple different cities, both our surrounding cities and target cities and some other ones that we looked at. But generally, they all kind of employed 4 main points. They discussed if it was owner-occupied or not. Some of them didn't even mention anything. They also talked about number of people or rooms to establish this use. They talked about the duration of the stay, they talked about if meals were going to be provided or not as well. And so with that, I will give you the, sorry, let me see if I can pump this onto our PowerPoint real quick, because I think this will be a lot more helpful for y'all to see, so you don't lose, I don't lose you halfway through this. Fixes it. Yep. Okay, perfect. Here we go. Sorry about my technical difficulties. See, I don't come very often, and now this is what happens. I just break the machines. So the staff recommendation, as we started looking through this, and I'm going to kind of talk through basically staff recommendation where we come at from that, and then have you all respond to that if you like it, don't like it, think it's too strict, think it's too lenient. We can kind of have an organic conversation as we go. Again, the goal of this is to get a general consensus out of the commission so that staff understands what direction we need to go as we start writing up amendments if one is needed, or if the commission decides, nope, don't want to regulate it, don't need an amendment. So with that, from these four kind of base portions of the land use and definition, staff kind of discussed this, and we think that we should really split these uses into two different things, because the general concern from the public and some of the comments given from the commission seem to allude to the fact that if it's owner-occupied, that's maybe something a little different than something that's not owner-occupied. You know, we heard comments from the community about, oh, well, you know, when this happens, that's a business and it's not part of the community anymore, and we moved into a residential neighborhood, so on and so forth. I think that if you have a person who owns that home who's living there and doing that, that's a completely different mentality, because you do still have that community there. That's just their choice about how to rent that space. So we do break that off, and we'll talk more about it's important for both the definition and also for the conversation about what zoning districts should be permitted in. The number of people, we thought 4 more was appropriate, and that number came from 2 things. First, it's a splitting of the difference at 3 ultimately, with 2 or more coming from building code and 4 unrelated people coming from our existing single-family definition. Staff was kind of like, let's just meet in the middle on this one. 3 works. So anything, if you have, ultimately, as we talk about this definition, the way to interpret it is 3 or less this does not apply to. So this is going to apply to folks that are renting rooms or renting to more than 4 people, 4 or more people. Additionally, the duration of the stay is greater than 30 days. This comes from the state requirement about hot tax. So things that are greater than 30 days don't pay hot tax, which is the hotel occupancy tax. And then finally, meals. We didn't think that that really mattered, so you could provide meals or you don't have to. It's kind of the same impact either way, is what staff was thinking. So with that, we came up with this preliminary definition. So this is lodging and boarding house owner-occupied. And it says an owner-occupied building containing a single dwelling unit where lodging with or without meals is provided for 4 or more persons for compensation for a period greater than 30 days. This definition includes dormitories, residence halls, fraternity, sorority houses, rooming houses, and other similar arrangements where individual bedrooms are leased and common areas for food preparation are provided. This definition does not apply to hotel, motel, group homes, or bed and breakfast type establishments. We specifically put the inclusionary and exclusionary clauses in here to help provide greater understanding and interpretation in definitions. The exclusionary items we already have definitions for, so we already have definitions in the UDC for a hotel, motel, group homes, bed and breakfasts, and a couple other similar-esque items, but also wanted to capture some nuances of other terms that are used, such as a rooming house, dormitories, attorney houses, all kind of ends up working the same way. And I know you don't have a university here right now, but maybe one day we will and may have those issues upon us. The next portion that I have is the non-owner occupied. And you'll see that the real difference in here in the definition is just the first one started off with owner-occupied building, and this one doesn't have that. And that's the real only difference in these two things. With that, we then start talking about what zoning districts are these each appropriate in. Staff feels that there's different zoning districts that should be applied to each of these land uses since they're different fundamentally in nature. So this is first the owner-occupied. These are all the areas that we think it should be permitted by right. This was based on both understanding of where single-family homes are allowed and the fact that it functions very similar to that, but also that an owner-occupied boarding house could function as a true commercial business. And so we looked at where do we allow bed and breakfasts, where do we allow hotels, motels, and where do we allow single-family houses, and then came up somewhat with this list. So staff is proposing to have it allowed in every zoning district with the exception of pre-development, mobile home park, the public use district, and manufacturing heavy. By contrast, the non-owner occupied would be permitted in right in the R3, R4, and Main Street mixed use. So R3 is the duplex, R4 is multifamily. And then in non-residential districts, it'd be permitted by right in office, professional, neighborhood services, general business 2, and M1. And then we determined that maybe a specific use permit would be appropriate because there may be certain conditions when it's appropriate to mix it in with residential, traditional single-family dwellings. And so we're recommending a specific use permit for our traditional single-family dwelling districts, such as the agricultural district, residential agriculture, R1, 2, 6, and 7, and then mobile home subdivision, garden home, townhomes. Additional requirements, we're looking at on the owner-occupied for parking, just requiring 2 spaces. This is the same as a normal house, so somebody can buy a house, live in it, and then rent extra rooms as they so desire, even with this land use, and don't have to add extra parking or things like that, whereas the non-owner occupied would be required to have 1 space plus 1 for each additional bedroom. So a typical 4-bedroom type boarding house would end up having 5 parking spaces. In summary, owner-occupied, the guest stay is greater than 30 days. It's allowed by right in almost all zoning districts. Requires 2 parking spaces. The non-owner occupied, 4 more guests. Again, the stays are greater than 30 days. It's allowed by right in residential districts for duplexes and multifamily. And then requires an SUP in the detached single-family districts. And then the parking is 1 space plus 1 per each additional bedroom. We did a fair amount of research in surrounding areas and other places. A lot of this is in line. The parking requirements are in line with what we're seeing across the board for these kinds of things. They range in difference for anywhere from 1 per bedroom to like 1 per bedroom plus 10% of the overall parking. There's some for full-time employees as well. I think for what we're seeing in our city and for what we perceive in the foreseeable future, that most of these won't have employees, full-time employees that are going to these things. They're going to be serviced by cleaning folks. A couple of them may have food preparation people that come in temporarily and either drop off food. I doubt they're going to be preparing it there because they'd be required to have a commercial kitchen, and that's a little more difficult to do, especially on a boarding house level. And so I don't know that we're going to have as much of that kind of need for a whole bunch of additional parking beyond kind of 1 for each bedroom, because we can go ahead and make the assumption that everybody's going to have a car, and then kind of 1 extra space for either a guest or maybe that service worker who's coming by to do work, those kinds of things. Because again, as the non-owner occupied, we're really looking at that more on the full-blown commercial side, and thus kind of hitting it up on the commercial standards. But with that, that's kind of my first crack at it, so I'm happy to scroll back through these slides as necessary, as y'all have questions or as y'all need to look more through it.
All right, well, this is a public hearing, so we'll go ahead and open the public hearing at 6:43. Anyone wishing to speak on this, please come up, state your name and address for the record. And seeing no one making a stampede, we'll close the public hearing at 6:44. All right, commissioners.
You go back to the definitions, please.
First one or second one? It's the owner-occupied first.
So with this definition, and in the zoning areas that it's allowed, let me pick on Mr. Roberts here. He could build next to his major auto repair shop, he could build a structure or a dwelling and open a boarding house.
Yep. That's correct. And in fact, since the property on either side of that is zone general business, he could open either a owner-occupied or non-owner occupied. So one important thing to also think about in this, and I'll let Glenn back me up as the former fire marshal on this, these establishments we're traditionally thinking of as a single-family dwelling. It doesn't have to be that. One of the things we haven't included in this is anything about architectural standards or things like that. That's probably a follow-up conversation to this, because our standards are based kind of in context about where things are located. So we may not want traditional single-family home-looking things next to bigger commercial businesses, that kind of portion. We can look at that. Don't know that that's in the context of tonight's discussion, but the flip side of that also is that existing commercial businesses would have to be retrofitted most likely to be able to have this use because they're not rated for an occupancy with an overnight stay. I don't remember what that exact portion is, like a hotel is, but typically there's extra code requirements that come in with that, such as fire sprinklers, different kinds of emergency access and posted plans, and so you get more of the hotel-type requirements that these things would have to function under.
I'm struggling to find the significance of including the with or without meals. It seems just extra.
So traditionally in boarding houses, and one of the long kind of carryovers on this is that some of them provide meals, like a meal service, and typically it's served family style, not off of a menu kind of thing. The definitions that we've researched typically have both things of with or without meals, and the rationale in that, I believe at the time, and probably still valid today, is the argument that could be made of, well, I'm not that because I do meals, or I don't do meals, and so I'm not that. And so this just eliminates kind of that use portion and any of the questions that come with that in our definition.
Okay.
So again, I guess touching on Mr. Bro's example, yeah, building a facility, but, you know, the idea behind this and the causation of this is, you know, people converting existing single-family homes into what we're now calling lodging and boarding house. You know, again, you know, I missed the last meeting, so, you know, how is that really significantly different than a house being rented?
Sure.
I mean,
So
whether you've got a family or whether you got 3 college roommates together.
yeah, so the overall discussion that was given at the last meeting on this was that the boarding houses and midterm rentals, there was enough things in building code that they wanted that the commission wanted to see some kind of regulation, so that people weren't just taking an existing single family home, breaking up the rooms and renting it over the internet and just calling it a day, you know, not ever being on site kind of thing. And so the response to that staff has come up with is this proposal. We're also happy to say, hey, if you don't want to regulate it, we're happy to forward that sentiment on to City Council as well. If you think, you know, if the commission ultimately decides, nope, after more thought on this, we think it's enough of a similar use to single family, we're fine calling it single family under our existing definition, which it could fit, or at least most of the examples that we have in town right now could fit under that. If that's the way that the commission wants to go, which again limits to 4 unrelated people inside the home and still being a single family.
But then again, the burden of proof is on us to prove they're
It is.
unrelated.
Yep. And so the other conversation that I we'll have for another time, dependent on what the outcome of this conversation is the code implications to this as far as what is easily enforceable, what's not, where all those come from. Again, as the commission knows, the array of what we can choose to do as a city on this is very wide, very broad. Staff unfortunately doesn't have the time or resource to give you every possible scenario and run you through every outcome and say, pick it from this laundry list. So the best way we can do this is say, am I in the right ball field to begin with? And if I am, then let's start narrowing it down.
I mean, and for my part, again, being a landlord and having rental properties, I've had my tenants, had kids move back in, and at times there's been 6 or 7 people in a house where it's only 3 bedrooms, and those things kind of happen, and I really hate to see somebody get caught up in something like that where that's not really the case. But then on the flip side, and primarily toward the life safety issues, when you have 6, 7, 8 people living in a house, whether they're related or not, it could potentially be a problem. And so that's kind of where I've struggled with this, and I could see us doing something, but I would like to see a higher number, to be like maybe more than 5 people. And that would also address some of the parking issues, which are some of the other, and actually one of the primary concerns about the complaints that were brought to us previously. If you have a limit before you regulate it, then you also going to limit the number of vehicles that are going to be there.
Yeah. And again, this definition is not perfect. This is a working definition by all means. So one of the other things that staff kicked around was changing people out to rooms. And that may solve your issue, because in theory, if you're talking about a single tenant who rents it for their family while they may have more than 4 people, they're renting, it's a single rent, not individual rooms being rented. And I think that's, again, all of this is that tricky part for us in regulation of how do we write that, and then ultimately, which is the follow-up question of how do we enforce that, which typically always follows the how do we write that portion.
What's a group home?
A group home is a state-defined term that typically has to do, in a very easy nutshell, with different types of qualifying groups that live together, typically in convalescent states or rehab-type items. But it's a state-rated designation. There's a bunch of state law about it. You'll see in our permitted uses table we have a specific line item for it. And I want to say it's permitted by right in almost every residential district, and then with a SUP in all of our commercial districts.
So we see
Say,
a number.
say that again?
We see a number of group homes that come in where I work, and basically, the group homes that we typically see there are a group of anywhere 6 to 8 of people that have various sorts of disabilities, autistic or whatever, that they cannot live by themselves without some sort of supervision, but they're semi-independent, and so there's somebody usually there who is an employee of the state or some other charitable type organization that basically oversees them, making sure that they're addressing their basic life skill needs, and they're also not putting themselves in potential danger.
And those are allowed where, you said?
I believe they're allowed by right in every residential district, and then with an SUP in all of the commercial districts, if my memory serves me. My staff's nodding their head, so yeah. That's
Okay, so I'm not sure of the term, but a term I've heard before is a halfway house. Recovering addicts, people released from prison, those types of things. Where does that fit in here?
So I don't think the people released from prison will fall in there. Typically, drug rehabilitation can, in certain circumstances, so long as it doesn't have the criminality law portion to it, so it's not convicted felons rehabilitation kind of thing. It's just like a rehab program typically run by nonprofits or things like that. Dan, chime in at any point in time. I'm sure you have a lot of experience with this item.
It's going to depend on whether or not it's protected status. So if it's protected under the ADA or the FHA, then it's going to qualify. So. But not prison release unless it's in conjunction with some other disability that's protected.
Can you move to the piece of the slide here that shows us your, where the zoning districts can be authorized in again?
So the definition for a group home that we have, Mr. Bro, is a specialized lodging house and boarding house which provides long-term supervised housing in a conventional residential setting for no more than 3 persons who are physically or mentally handicapped, developmentally disabled, or are victims of crime and have no more than 2 supervisory personnel in the residence at the same time.
No more than 3, you said?
Yes, on that. But I would have to double check the definition against the state law to see if it's changed at all.
When you get to your non-residential districts, you're going to have to convince me that allowing this in general business, GB2, or manufacturing light is a good thing.
Sure. So
I don't think it is.
if we think of these similar to a hotel, right? Because that's functionally what it's doing.
No, it's not similar to a hotel. You specifically said so in the definition.
No, I said it's not a hotel. I didn't say it's not similar to a hotel, right? So the land use ultimately, which is exchanging of compensation for lodging, is at the root of a hotel. The difference on the hotel easily is the duration of stay. So that's one of the easy portions on this. However, we allow hotels in general business 2, and M1 by right. So if I would allow a hotel to be there, which is even a more intense use, why would I not allow somebody to run a boarding house?
I can think of a lot of reasons, especially the things we allow in these districts that is different than where we would normally think of these places being located. Most of these places are going to be located in residential or alongside residential. Sorority houses, they're not going to build one in a GB2. Nobody at GB2 is going to want them to. I'm not going to want them to.
Depends on where the college or university typically lands. I mean,
I hear you, but
sure, a lot of this so that we make very informed, smart planning decisions going forward is not just looking at what the context of today looks like, correct? But what's the context of 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 25 years from now? Because I'm sure that all of us know that there are some old definitions that are just hang-arounds in the UDC from years past that probably are warranting an update.
OP and NS are okay, because we have long stressed the fact that we would not mind having businesses that had residential above them, okay? So I can see that working out for our city as it has for others. But when you get into the other 3, I'm not sure that I've seen that in any other place.
And so why would we prevent it? That's the question I have back. Why would you not want a boarding house in those zoning districts? What would a boarding house do that's
incompatible.
detrimental? What's not
Incompatible.
If
It's incompatible with the uses that we have described for GB2, and M1.
So
It's incompatible.
but we've determined that a hotel is compatible. And so I guess I'm at a loss a bit of how this is different in that type of use, right?
We don't allow houses.
Sure, but we're not talking about a house.
If
The
you're going to
structure
build a
doesn't have to look
structure to
like a
put people in, what are you going to call it, a hotel?
It could be.
You going to call it a lodging building?
It could be.
And I don't see that belongs in M1. I don't care what you call it, sorority house or any other thing. It does not belong in an M1 light industrial district. It just doesn't.
Mr. Chairman, just to elaborate, follow up, I've got your answer, Bryce. So the The number is 6 persons with disabilities and 2 supervisors
So it's gone up.
by state law. That's a community home for those with disabilities.
Go ahead.
So, yeah, I heard that, Richard. So where do I start? Okay. First of all, yes, you're heading in the right direction because we need definitions of some kind. You know, as a former code official, what bothers me the most about the uses we're talking about is we don't see people running around building in they're not specifically building a house for a boarding home. They're buying in a subdivision, and yes, they may buy one and have it built, but they're not running around in M1s and GBs and building these. And a boarding house is a mini hotel, okay, really. And what bothers me as a code official is we're using structures they were not designed for. These single family homes are built to a different building code than every other structure in this city. When we start talking about hotels, they have to have firewalls, they have to have exit emergency lights, they've got to have, there's all kinds of life safety things that we build into commercial structures that we don't build into 1 and 2 family dwellings. Part of the problem, though, is you push on this here and it pops out over. It's a really squishy thing. We've talked before about we talk about a single family home, and traditionally that meant something. Today that doesn't mean the same thing. It used to mean a husband and wife and their kids. Okay, well now it could mean the folks living together. They don't even have to be married anymore. It could be just 2 people that want to live together, and so they buy or rent a house. Okay, so and it's the same thing if and I think it was brought up. So my wife and I move out and we want to rent our house to somebody, so I rent it to Bryce. Okay, well, Bryce is having a hard time making the rent payment, so he takes in a roomie. He gets Nick to move in with him. All right. So, but I can see a difference in roommates versus the boarding house, where the specific purpose of that structure is to take in people that aren't, okay. Some observations, and I made some notes. Number one, I think the short-term, mid-term, long-term rental thing, and I know you've got it in a separate discussion, and that's a good one when we decide who's going to pay tax and who isn't going to pay tax. But I don't think a time limit should have anything to do with the land use. It's either a boarding house or it's not. It doesn't matter whether somebody, rents a room for a month or they rent a room for a year. It's a boarding house, okay? So I think maybe one of the things we ought to consider is leaving that short-term, mid-term, long-term thing completely out of our definitions, okay? Not sure why a bed and breakfast, I understand everybody calls them bed and breakfast, but what am I doing? I'm on a boarding house. I'm renting a room to,
I will say on the bed and breakfast, there's a cap on how long you can stay there.
Okay.
In our definition, and I think it's like 14 days.
And what really clicked in my mind when you were talking about 6 months is, okay, so Randolph changes their curriculum, and now the PIT program is 7 months. Now they're no longer, the things we're trying to regulate then are no longer, that's why I think it might be we need to separate time limits from the definitions. And the only other thing is, when I look at this slide that you have up here right now, again, if we have somebody that comes to the city and says, I want to build a boarding house, I want to build it right here in this GB, Well, two things happen. Number one, it's no longer under the 1 and 2 family residential code. It's built under the commercial building code, the fire code, and all of those, okay? I don't see anybody doing that. They're converting 1 and 2 family dwellings in existing subdivisions. So I'm not sure that this,
Yeah.
well, number one, where I was going with this is it's okay for the owner occupied because they can be in those districts. But you're basically slamming the door on the non-owner occupied ones. Because the only place they're gonna wanna be is they wanna be able to go out and convert that house. And they won't be able to do it if we leave the zoning restrictions in there.
Well, let me offer this up maybe, because I'm sometimes a little more blunt and direct than Bryce. I missed the last discussion, and I watched the tape, watched the video, and I asked Bryce, what is it they're trying to do? And he said, like, you watch the tape, you tell me. And so maybe here is a bit of, I think, the challenge that staff had in trying to come up with a regulation. It's still not clear to me that the commission knows what the problem is you're trying to address. And so I think staff is kind of grasping at it. And I don't mean this as a criticism, certainly don't take this way. I think this is just part of this process. There's something that doesn't feel right, but I'm not sure what it is, and when I'm asked to define it, I have a hard time kind of defining it. I mean, I think we all do that, and I think that was staff's struggle with this. And so, you know, there's been a lot of conversation about pit pads, and what's the problem, or what's the concern we have with pit pads. And on the one hand, we heard, yeah, it's really not that different than Bryce renting a house and renting it out to, you know, and if the class and comp study doesn't go well for the city this year, he's renting it out to Nick and Gil and Waylon and Bill in GIS and maybe one of the fire guys. I mean, you know, it's not that different. What we've heard from the residents are concerns about parking and noise and upkeep. And what we've heard from even you and other folks is, but those are issues we have with residential homes that are owner occupied. And so is it really a bigger problem? And what sometimes we hear is it's not, because these companies that buy these and are doing it are trying to make money and they keep it up. And part of it, I will say, is let's look at our problems versus another communities. And so not to pick on those who may have graduated from Texas State and lived around campus, or Trinity and lived around campus, whose neighbors complained about ongoing partying and late night stuff. You know, that's not really what we have. What we have are folks in the Air Force who are coming in for a particular program, and not that I'm sure some of you who weren't in the military couldn't tell some stories about various things that got out of hand, but by and large, we're not getting calls about noise and rowdiness and fights and stuff. It's vehicles. But again, Dave Richmond, you remember, who was chairperson, had issues with houses with multiple vehicles, so it's really not that different. And so my question kind of then comes, what is it we're trying to really regulate? Commissioner Outlaw talked about terms in code and building code and what needs to be met, and what I would argue is, to some degree, are we overcomplicating it? That the way we're trying to tackle that is be creating this district that create, or this use that creates all these other questions and challenges, as opposed to, do we rely on the code that has limitations on the number of people that can occupy and and we just sort of fall back on that. And I guess this is part of what I'm saying is, I realize that we may have problems with pit pads. I realize that at times some of the neighbors may be frustrated with the way they go, but maybe is the way to tackle that through our code enforcement, which is imperfect, as opposed to through creating a use that it is even less perfect, that hangs up a bunch of other people that we want. So one of the challenges here is, I frankly kind of agree. I mean, I think Bryce put this up to get you to think about it, but yeah, do we really want people living next to Mark's business who may start complaining about it? Yeah, it's a commercial district. Let people do commercial operations. You don't want residents near them to create those conflicts. You don't want put people living in an industrial area converting with truck traffic. So if you want to take that out, The question then is, where would y'all ever approve an SUP in those residential districts? What would be the basis of it or not? Somebody walks in and goes, all right, R2 district, here's his house, I've got it. How are y'all ever going to make that call? It sounds good in theory, but where have you denied an SUP for auto repair services in GB? To my knowledge, you haven't in memory, just like you haven't denied a home daycare in a single family as well. We feel like we worry about a problem, but when are you going to really say yes or no? And so I only say that to, I think your struggle is maybe something else. You're empathetic with the residents, you're empathetic with the problems. Part of our role and your role for volunteering is to fix that, but can we maybe go about it a better way than creating this overcomplicated system that at times we hear people lament and complain about our overcomplicated system can do more harm than good. I'll just offer that up because not having been here and watched the video and asking Bryce, I think that's the struggle. And so he was left with this task that I don't know whether he could do. Go, let me give you this framework, but I think what I'm hearing is y'all going, this is solving a problem that's not what we have. This is maybe a problem that they have in San Antonio or some other community. It's not ours, so why go this route?
Well, and you make some good points, Brian. And again, my concern is code requirements and life safety. And yes, we allow in-home daycare, we allow foster homes, we allow that kind of thing, but it's by permit, and it requires, it then allows for code enforcement. And when you look in the fire codes, it doesn't say you can't have a boarding house in a single-family residence, but what it says is it starts to add on certain requirements. Okay? And I don't necessarily disagree with how complicated does it have to be. We do allow some uses, and those come with some requirements, and so I'm not sure we should allow boarding house and lodging, to skate,
So let me say this. Working with Bryce, part of the discussion was, well, what is this pit pad thing? Well, closest we could get was a boarding house. But you're right, it's not a traditional boarding house. It's a bit of a different deal. Yeah. And because the reason cities began to regulate boarding houses a century and a half ago was a very different deal. And that's not to say that we don't have problems elsewhere. But again, what I would offer up is by trying to slot it into a boarding house, is it this imperfect thing that we create these other things that we have? And so again, really, difference between a pit pad and Bryce going, I need a bunch of roommates, is that they all have separate leases with the owner. But functionally, it's no different. And so if there are concerns, the question is then what really applies with building code or fire code changes, and how much of it is best accomplished through regulation versus when we find out about them, we outreach, we try to work with the owner to do things and put things in that likely they may be willing to do for insurance purposes anyway, or we already have codes on. Going, look, put up a map in each room with exits. The company that we've talked about with the waves, do we really think that they would balk at that if we had called them up and said, hey, we have some of these concerns and let's deal with some life safety? Or do we go, oh yeah, no, our insurance kind of has us do it and we've got that and we'd have fire extinguishers and we do this thing. Is there a way to sort of try to accomplish that? And so my point is simply is if the concern of the committee is how do we deal with these building code safety issues, then I think you need to define that and say it's not about appeasing the residents who have this issue with the use and the fact that there's not somebody long-term living there.
Right.
Again,
No,
I just think, and I think that's where staff is struggling. I think Bryce did a great job, but I think it's not clear to me what the problem is and what the best way to get there.
Well, you're not alone. I'm not sure it's clear to me where we're going right now.
Let me ask you this. What are the, if you convert an old house into a bed and breakfast, what are the requirements on that? fire extinguishers, smoke alarms, put a map on the back of the door?
I don't know, we'd have to find out, and this is because we don't have anybody here doing a bed and breakfast. So it's kind of like, we'll deal with it. when
You
it comes.
need an SUP in residential.
Yeah.
A lot of it,
That's the first step.
yeah, a lot of it has to do with with numbers, okay? And for instance, in-home daycare, the fire codes, there's a limit to how many. But most of the requirements then to have a fire extinguisher and, we make sure bedroom windows open and you can't have certain kinds of you can't have double deadbolts and things like that. Those come out of the state requirements for in-home daycare. And the same when we start talking about group homes and things. It's the building and fire codes, the international codes, talk about no more than 5 or more than 5 or something like that. But the real requirements for the particular life safety things tend to come more from state regulations than they do out of the building codes. So,
So let me offer this up. If that's the concern, if the concern is this sort of safety thing, and because to me that's the most legitimate there is.
well, it's probably a combination. I mean, my experience I have those concerns because of but I also am sensitive to the neighbors and their complaints. But as we talked before, we have ordinances against noise and trash and weeds and, so I'm not sure. My comments are based on my experience, and I don't know if the other commissioners feel the same way or,
Yeah. So how many pit pads do we know about that we've got? Would you guess? Or how many do you think we have? Half dozen. We don't have that many. So if the concern is that, between, and this is where maybe you guys can punt to a new board that we have, which is the Building and Standards Commission, that deals with this sort of stuff more. Maybe staff sits down with that group that's their focus, truly, talks about what are the things we'd want to see in these type of pit pads we have. And then I mean this, let staff try a outreach program, see what we get, and if we can solve this concern that way, then maybe the regulation part isn't needed. Because I think the things that likely they would come up with, the building owners are probably going to go, oh yeah, I can do that. I can do that. Am I happy to do that? Particularly if it staves off this bigger hammer that's going to have greater negative implications to it.
And also not to forget the fact that most of our subdivisions, and almost every single subdivision that's been built since I've been here, has a homeowners association with specific covenants and restrictions. And so while I am empathetic to the plight of the resident and the slowness of HOAs, which is even slower than the city, there is still those protections. And really there's that level of governance that's even lower and on an even more neighborhood basis than the city itself. And so if that group of residents in that HOA wants there to not be any pink houses in their HOA, they can pass a rule that says you can't have a pink house. And that's their choice to do. And so we also have that, at our disposal as well.
And I think those older neighborhoods without HOAs, they tend to rely on neighborliness a little more. I mean, in my experience, it tends to be a little more walking over, knocking on the door, and going, hey, can you do this? Can you do that? Doesn't mean we don't have problems, and code enforcement doesn't have to step in, but yeah, I'm gonna sit down and let Bryce find out.
The reason this is a problem for us is because it was kicked down by city council. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a problem for us.
But I will tell you this, and I mean this sincerely. I think city council said, we have this thing these residents complain about. We could spend a bunch of time dealing with it, but it may involve a use. So let's kick it off to P&Z and get what you want. And I mean this sincerely. If your answer coming back is, and we think working with code enforcement, working with voluntary effort to deal with life safety, I think council's going, you did exactly what we wanted, which is to tell us when we do best not to pass additional regulations. So,
And I would concur that this is just, I think we're looking for a reason to regulate something that is not a major issue. And
would it be unreasonable to require, just like we do daycares and foster homes and, you know, isn't it an unreasonable request that these people pull a permit and submit to building and fire inspections? Is that unreasonable?
I mean, I'll look to y'all for that answer.
If we're gonna make them have fire extinguishers, room evacuation plans, et cetera, yeah, you're gonna have to have them pull permit, but just like fences and everything else, we ain't got people to do the work, so, why are we doing it?
Can you tell me what a two-family dwelling is?
Duplex.
A duplex?
It has 2 dwelling units inside of a single structure on one lot,
Okay.
which would be different than like a townhome that's like an attached townhome. Those are still individual units that are sold individually on individual lots.
Thank you. Well, part of the problem here is we're dealing with something that's new and something that's evolving. Because if you look at San Antonio, companies with these scooters started coming in, and everybody thought it was a great idea. This is fun, it's good, it's economical, it saves the environment. Whoopee-doo. Well, now it's a problem. It's a big problem in San Antonio, and they're kicking some of these scooter companies out. People think that delivering packages by drone is a great idea. Can't wait until drones start colliding with one another and falling on your house and cracking the windshield on your car. It's going to be a problem. But we just don't know yet. And I think we're dealing with something here, too. This is something new. People haven't been doing this before. You know, before, let's just throw the pit pads back in there, but before this, nobody went around buying a $500,000 home and stuffing it full of renters and, you know, renting the rooms out. Nobody did that. Well, now it's starting to be fairly common. So is it a problem? I don't know. Is scooters a problem? It is in San Antonio. Are drones delivering packages a problem? Not yet. So is this a problem? I don't know. So do we want to start making regulations and rules now ahead of the storm, or do we want to wait for the storm and then start trying to regulate? That's what we're dealing with here, and I don't know how to solve it.
Well, but then if we start putting regulations into place before the storm gets here, we may not get them right, and we cause other problems. You know, I mean, I see, you know, a whole can of worms. I mean, certainly this thing is something that needs to be monitored, and we need to keep watching it. Maybe it's something we come back in 6 months or a year and discuss again. But, you know, for me personally right now, I don't see it being enough of an issue to justify the time and effort by staff and by this body to go through the process of creating all these regulations. But that's my take.
You know, I sat here with the room full of people. Their biggest complaint was excessive car parking, blocking driveways, trash, parties at night, especially weekends, in the backyard, creating noise, music, whatever you want to call it. But those were the biggest complaints. Not the fact that they were living there, the fact that they were creating problems. How do we have rules on noise, on blocking driveways, you name it. These people have got to learn to call the cops. That's all there is to it.
And I'll go back to, you know, what Brian will tell you all day long about the bad neighbor syndrome. You know, it's code enforcement police can do so much, but some of this at one point in time is just saying, hey, can y'all keep it down? You know, or, you know, he uses the grass example a lot. Neighbor gets too high of grass, call code enforcement, they come out, measure, it's not quite there. You call them back 2 days later, it's there. They then write them a notice, and they get 10 days to go mow it. If they don't mow it, then we'll force mow it and bill them for it and give them a citation. But that person mows it, and at that point in time, it gets into a cycle, and that person gets that notice once every 2 months or however often the grass grows, and they go and they mow it, as opposed to the neighbor going over and saying, hey, can you mow your grass a little more? You know, causes some issues, and having that conversation. And we're just having a direction away from that neighborly talking and into a more privatized, you know, my home is my compound and I don't leave unless I'm going to work and I just sit in the car and I don't know my neighbor's mentality.
Well, the noise after 10 o'clock. I mean, that's been on the books for a long time.
Yep.
All right, you got enough from us?
So is the general consensus then, what I am hearing is that there's not a desire from the commission to amend the Unified Development Code, at least in regard to adding a land use for this, but instead look at possibly creating a permitting portion or identifying what regulations need to be there? And is that something the commission's interested in doing, or is that something that they would like the new Building and Standards Commission to cover?
Or do you just want to monitor it, see if
Or
it
just
becomes more
monitor it.
problematic, and we'll come back in a year?
Well, if I may, Mr. Chairman, I think that's kind of what I was hearing, that the general consensus is we don't need to regulate it right now, and maybe watch it for a while. I do think, and maybe Mr. James can jump in here, that council is looking for something from us. And this isn't an action item tonight, so, you know, all I'm suggesting is maybe we there needs to be an action item maybe in the future or do we even need to?
I don't think you need it. I mean, if the general consensus via nod of heads is, yeah, at this point, it's not enough of a problem and there's not enough of a perfect solution to regulate it, but let's have staff keep an eye on it. Let's maybe talk about it in a year. You know, so for example, tomorrow morning, say if 4 or 5 of those scooter things appear in front of Mr. Bro's house, we want to tackle that.
They're going to get recycled.
But truly, in your message to council, at this point, there's not enough of a problem with not a good enough solution. Let's keep an eye on it, see if it grows, becomes more problematic. Let staff work on it through the usual mechanisms, and that's our thought. Yeah, I think they're perfectly fine with that. I don't think they were saying create a regulation. They said, look at this, give us your thought.
Well, I was just wondering about how we communicate that to council, whether we need to do something formally or.
I think
that
if
was
we get
all.
a general nod that that's how you feel, we can tell them that.
I mean, yeah,
They can watch the
I can come address it, or, you know, we can send them a letter, or we'll just let you guys
I think
pass the
staff
word.
can characterize it, you guys chat with them. I mean, I think if the general consensus via nod of heads is that's kind of where you are, then
Yeah.
we can move on. We got other stuff to do than coming back again on this one.
I think so.
If that's the same thing with short and midterm
Pretty
rentals.
much. So for short-term rentals,
In that case, would you like to withdraw this item from the agenda?
it is listed as a public hearing, so when I have a public hearing, I do want to go over it just very briefly. So you already know what those are. We've already been over the impact concerns. Again, these are rough numbers from some of our surrounding places that we looked at. We're at 18 to 22, the best that staff can figure out from looking at all the big name booking sites. And out of a population of 40,000 people, it's a very low number. So overall, city staff doesn't think that this is, that we don't recommend creating any additional regulation, but we're happy to watch it, see where it goes. If it starts becoming a bigger issue or we start getting a lot of complaints, we'll bring it back. But really the items that really encourage that kind of short-term rental of homes in the truest sense are often tourism and destination locations. And right now we just don't bring in enough overnight tourism for this to really take hold. I think we just passed our busiest season, which is probably San Antonio's Fiesta, for people booking houses in Schertz. Other than that, we perceive them as being used for, you know, around the holidays, a family coming in, visiting other families, not enough space. Instead of getting a hotel, we rent a house, those kinds of things. So staff's recommending we just kind of hold off, see where it goes.
All right, since this is a public hearing, it's 7:27. Does anybody have any comments? So please make your way to the podium. State your name and address for the record. And seeing no takers, 7:28, we'll close the public hearing. All right, next item on the agenda, requests and announcements. Request by commissioners to place items on a future agenda. Gentlemen. Nope. And lady, yes. Announcements by commissioners. Anybody?
I ran into David Richmond Friday over at the base. He's doing well. His wife is not doing well. Got some medical problems. They're living at the Ark,
Yeah.
and he said he loves it. It's great. Best thing that ever happened.
He doesn't have to mow a yard anymore.
Doesn't have to mow the grass. he's having fun.
All right. Good to hear. Announcements by staff.
We have a couple of new site plan applications. Just a reminder, no questions. If you want to talk to us about them, just come see us after the meeting. The first one is for 5804 Tri-County Parkway. So just at your bearings, this is Tri-County Parkway. This is the existing Verizon building. They are requesting to do an amendment to change the parking and fire lane in this general area so they can add in 2 new generators. Not changing the building, just trying to add 2 new generators. The second one is for 11787 FM 1518. So West Schaefer 1518. This is the proposed Dollar General. It's 9,122 square feet, retail building.
We have a new site plan for a convenience store with gas pumps on I-35 and Schwab Road. They're proposing approximately 7,000 square foot convenience store here with gas pumps down in front. We also have an amending site plan for the First United Bank, I believe. They're looking to add an additional, so this is the additional First United Bank building. This is 3009 right here. This is the Forest Ridge residential neighborhood back there. They're looking to add an additional building here, about 4,000 to 5,000 square feet for an office building for a title company. And that's an amending site plan.
All right, anybody have anything else? All right, adjourn 7:30.